We need to be moving across right in the middle.
We need to be right.
You look at Lou and I'll see.
Hi, everyone. We are live right now, but we're just going to give a moment to let everybody tune in. So, just hang tight.
How do you look? Normal.
Getting thirsty.
Just a second, guys. We're just going to tweet you the link to let you know how you can check out our broadcast. Just want to make sure that everybody is tuned in.
Oh, cool.
All right, we will be on in just a minute. I need to disable. Michelle, can I ask you to just chat me so I can see if my sound is down?
I'll just slide you over.
Perfect. All right, if you guys at home are hearing us and seeing us, let us know.
Sounds perfect.
All right, well, I think it says there are 12 viewers, which is everyone we're expecting.
12. Excellent. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, guys. We are currently in 2 locations. This is a little bit of a different format for us. Our camera's right here, by the way. This is a little bit of a different format for us than you may have seen if you've joined us for previous tastings. We are with MWC Wines, and they are an Australian wine brand in Central Victoria. So we have winemaker Jo, but she couldn't be here with us stateside. So she is in Australia with Henry Hudson, who works with Hudson Wine Brokers, which is the boutique importer that brings these wines into the United States and who are responsible for why you can taste them in the United States today.
Excellent.
Do you guys just want to say a little hello?
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, we're here down in lovely sunny Melbourne, and it's already Friday.
Yes, we're talking to
Welcome
you from
to
the future. And with me right here is Tom Donegan, who works with Henry. Both of them, if you hadn't guessed, are Australian, but spend part of their time in the United States.
Most of our time, actually, these days. But g'day, guys. Good morning, good evening, or wherever you are. Do you want me to go in a little bit on what we do, or
Sure.
or maybe
yeah,
I might even switch over to Henry, just because they're kind of more like the special guests tuning in from Australia, so he can give a bit of insight to what we do and how the wines got here.
Great.
Great, thanks guys, appreciate that. Yeah, so we're, as Chelsea mentioned, Jo and I are in Melbourne, which is the capital of Victoria. For those who know, it's pretty famous for its racing carnival, which has just been happening this week. It's also where the home of the Australian Open tennis is, and then Grand Prix in March. So it's a pretty exciting place to be. just with regards to Hudson Wine Brokers, we are a boutique importer of Australian wines into the US. And the First Wine Company, or MWC, is one of the probably more recent wines we introduced earlier on this year. We were looking for a wine that was true to varietal, that looked really good in terms of the bottle, and we love the packaging, but with great wine in the bottle as well, and that came in at an attractive price point. And these wines retail in the US, depending where you are, from $14 to $16 roughly, depending on which state. Which to us is a great price point. It's where the growing it's a growing sector in the wine industry. And one of the things we've been excited about is we've shown these wines across the US. We only launched them in probably about May, I think. The wines are already in 15 states, and we think in the new year they'll probably be in about 20 states. So they've been taken up really well. People are really enjoying them. I think what we're trying to do is give people a little bit more access to more interesting Australian wines. I think there's a lot of Australian wine in the market that the agrees you will all be familiar. Is a little bit of a step up from that, or quite a step up from that, but still approachable, still fun, interesting labels to look at, but with some great wine in there, which you'll get to taste today. And Jo will tell us a little bit about her winemaking style and what we're trying to achieve with the wines here.
Yeah, we're really excited.
Did you guys?
Everyone to get to meet Jo and get this introduction. I feel like since we got started just a tiny bit late, we should put some Pinot Noir in our glasses to smell and or taste, but we're gonna take just a few minutes. You guys can begin to dive in, but we're gonna talk to Jo about who she is and how she came to MWC before we devote some actual focus time to talking about what we think of this roughly $15 Pinot Noir from Victoria. Jo,
Thanks.
where?
Thanks, Chelsea. And you just notice how easy it is to open this wine, so very easy to get into people's glasses.
Have you seen that meme of people, it says like, this should never happen again, or we'll never speak of this again, and it's someone having put a corkscrew through a screw cap?
I'll learn soon.
Yes. So we do love how easy it is to break into this Pinot Noir, as with many Aussie wines, but it's always a virtue, even if it's completely normal and you're used to it in Australia because it's really ubiquitous. Here, it's like something I completely look forward to when I'm planning on a wine that I need to just grab and go with.
Okay, Chelsea, do you want me to talk to Jo a little bit about
yes,
Jo's
absolutely.
Sure.
We would love that.
Jo, so great. So Jo, whereabouts do you live and where did you grow up?
So I live in a small town called Avenel, which has approximately 500 people in it. It's a very small town, and I grew up in the same town that I live in now. So I'm about 15 minutes from the winery in central Victoria. We're about an hour and a half north of Melbourne. The town itself has very few stores and very few people. It has one school, and it's the same school that I went to that my kids now go to. So it's all, it's a town where everyone knows everyone, and it's a lovely little community to live in.
Great. And tell us a bit about what inspired you to become a winemaker.
Interesting story. Well, for me it is. I travelled, well, first of all, I finished university. I did a marketing degree, HR degree. Don't tell anybody though, because someone might want me to try and sell wine, and I'd rather just make it, to tell you the truth. So after that, I thought, I don't know what I want to do. I don't really want to sit in an office all day. So I saved up. I worked a lot. I worked in restaurants. I worked in bars. I tasted lots of wine. I tasted expensive wine. I developed an interest in wine. Mostly the interest began about looking at how two different wines could be exactly the same variety but look so different. So that was where I initially began my interest. And then I travelled around Europe and Southeast Asia drinking I and working, and I ended up in London, worked for a Japanese bank, and then I enrolled to come back to Australia and study winemaking, which I began in 2002. So, and ever since then, I guess for me, it's a passion between the art and the science. So there's a lot of science that goes into winemaking, but there's also a lot of art which comes with the blending, and that's why I think I love the job most of all.
Great. And are there any particular grapes that you really like working with?
Well, I do like working with Chardonnay. However, Shiraz would be one of my favourites as well. Shiraz in central Victoria is so diverse that we can make so many different wines out of the same grape variety, and all of them can look so different. So Shiraz to me is something that I certainly work a lot with, and I certainly love working with. And we do make quite a few Shirazes, which I enjoy.
Great. What sort of wines do you like to drink at home yourself?
Well, my husband is a winemaker as well, so we tend to drink wines within not only central Victoria, but within Australia. We think Tasmania, we head over to Margaret River. We go different places all around Australia, and then occasionally we'll sneak in a European wine, but we are limited to choice for European wines in Australia.
Yeah, so. Yeah. There's so many great wines in Australia and so many different regions that you've plenty to choose from here as well. So how would you describe your style as a winemaker? What do you set out to try and achieve?
There's a few things I look for. I really like to capture the varietal expression in the glass. So it's very important to me that when you taste the wines we're making, that you can see that they are Pinot or Shiraz or Cabernet. I also think I like to look for a more elegant style of wine. So we will always use French oak. I don't use any American oak, and I think that adds to the elegance of the wines. And also I think it's really important to allow the vintage to speak in the wines, not too much, but every year is slightly different when it comes to winemaking. So it's important that we allow the vintage variation to speak in the wines each year.
As a female winemaker, what do you think you bring to the way you make your wines?
Well, I think it's the elegance for me. I'm not looking for something super ripe and super over the top. I'm looking for an elegant, balanced wine that's got some complexity about it, and that's what we're trying to do year after year.
Okay. And Victoria is a wine growing region. I think a lot of people might not know where Victoria sits. It's actually quite a big state. It's probably the size of Oregon. It's in the south of Australia, but on the east coast. As a wine growing area, as a state, it's actually got quite a lot of different regions there. You've got cooler climate down in Mornington, Yarra Valley. Your winemaking and your grapes are coming from central Victoria. Do you want to tell us a little bit about central Victoria?
Yeah, correct. So central Victoria is right in the centre, as it says, central Victoria in the middle. The best thing about central Victoria is still the variation we get from the different vineyards. So we have vineyards that are 490 metres in elevation. They're granite, they're cool climate, they're slow ripening, they're lovely, elegant wines with low yields. Then we head to regions that are slightly warmer, so the temperatures up there get to 45 degrees in summer. So the fruit is quite ripe. We head over to an area called Heathcote, which is in central Victoria, where everything is earthy and the soil is red, and the wines are kind of, I don't know, they're just full of complexity and interest year after year. And then we also draw fruit from right around the vineyard and the winery itself, where again we've got the influence of the Goulburn River winding through the region. So yeah, there's lots of different wonderful areas in central Victoria, which makes us be able to make Pinot, Shiraz and Cabernet all from central Victoria.
Great, because the different climates that you're achieving.
Yeah.
Great. So Chelsea, did we want to go into the Pinot?
Yes, I think we should definitely dive into the Pinot. I wanted to say hi to the bloggers that we have specifically. So we have our first question comes from our friend Jeff Kralik, the Drunken Cyclist, but we also have people from all over the country. So Joe and Henry, I just wanted you guys to know that there are people tuning in from Los Angeles, from Texas, from New York, from Virginia, people from all over Oregon. We have James the Wine Guy. We have Randy Fuller, who is now in Zin Wine. Frank Morgan at Drink What You Like. We have Luis Alberto at the Wine Hub. Sonadora, who is Wannabe Wino. Drunken Cyclist, who we just mentioned. Wine Wonkat, who writes another wine blog. We have Monique Soltani of Wino TV. We have the team from I Like This Grape, who are based here in Southern California with us. Wine Dine Wanda, who writes at The Black Dress Traveler. We have Mary Kressler at Vindulge, and we have Giselle Quillen, My Vine Spot. So thank you guys, all of you, for being here, and we can't wait to hear what you're thinking of our Pinot Noir. And our question for Joe, the first one came from Jeff, the Drunken Cyclist, and he wanted to know why it's so uncommon to see Pinot Noir blended with other grapes, and whether you've experimented with that at all.
Hello, Jeff. No, I haven't blended Pinot with other grapes. I think Pinot itself is quite a delicate variety, and I think if you blended Pinot with anything else, you would lose the Pinot character in the wine quite easily. Shiraz and Cabernet are quite strong varietals, and I think if we put Shiraz in with Pinot, it would just look like a dry red, and we'd be losing any kind of varietal characters we're trying to capture with the Pinot. So I haven't experimented with blending. However, I don't think that it would make the Pinot look any better than it already does.
We have a question from Randy at Now and Zin Wine, and Randy wants to know, he says that the cooler climate really shows in the acidity of the wine, and wanted you to just speak on that a bit, how it affects it.
Yeah, so hello Randy. Cooler climate means slower ripening, so that means the balance between the acid and the ripening is able to remain more natural, if you like. So with a lower yielding and a cooler climate, the acidity will certainly retain in the wine longer, and it's natural acidity. It's wine that will last a lot longer. We're not adding anything to the wine.
It really does. I can feel my mouth watering.
It's refreshing.
Yeah, like when I hold it in my mouth on my tongue for a while, I can really feel after I swallow just kind of that rush in a really pleasant way. Like it's gentle, but it has really lovely spice flavors, and then that acid backbone is really firm.
I think one cool thing about...
Oh, go on, sorry.
Sorry, Joe. I was just going to say something cool about this wine is it's very hard to get, I think, Pinot Noir at this sort of sub-20 price point, especially when it is so pure and sort of varietally correct and balanced and with that natural acidity. But I think another thing is people, because I get to show this wine around different states and different, I guess, cities around America, and people, I think 12 months ago, weren't even looking at Australia as a resource for Pinot, and now with this type of wine, and then as we step up through the ranks, we start to see that Australia, on that southern coast, on that cooler part of the country, we've got some really high quality Pinot Noir coming, and this is a great little, I guess, starting point for a lot of people. You know, at a really accessible price, they can go and get a really kind of honest and fresh and, you know, kind of balanced Pinot Noir.
Yeah, absolutely.
I find that it's sorry, we have more people talking to us than we're used to. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say the Pinot itself comes from the cool climate elevated region in the Strathbogies in central Victoria. So the elevation is 490 metres. So it's definitely in that cooler climate, slower growing, nicer ripening spectrum for us. It is certainly a lighter style Pinot. So we are looking to pick it before it gets really, really ripe, which allows us to maintain that acidity. So it's definitely what we're trying to capture, that lighter style kind of cherry, but it also has a little complexity, you know, a bit of oak. It's not overworked either, which is really important with Pinot. It's quite hard to make, and it's very easy to make it a dry red. So we just have to be really careful in the winery of how long it takes, and we have to be very delicate in the way we treat it.
Yeah. So you were mentioning to me before that you pick early on this, but then you really handle the fruit very gently.
We are.
You pick in the mornings.
Yes, keep it cool.
Pick in the cool time of the day, and then just treat it gently so you get the right tannin balance as well.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's very sensitive in terms of variety, and it has to be treated very differently than Shiraz and Cabernet for sure. Yeah.
Joe, some feedback I get about this wine when I'm showing people around the country is the spice quality that it has, and people are kind of amazed that a wine at the price has this, you know, all that red fruit you speak about, but then that spice quality that comes through really kind of warm, and it's that gentle kind of character that you're talking about, Chelsea. But is that something you see in Strathbogie as a region, or it's just something with this fruit, or is it, you think it's more coming from the sort of oak you use?
No, it's definitely from the Strathbogie region itself. There's certainly, when we get to the Shiraz, there's some Strathbogie component in the Shiraz as well, and it's certainly a consistent style from the vineyards in the Strathbogies that we see year after year. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So we have a few more questions I want to get into. A few of our guests are asking about screw caps and want to know a little bit about Australia's preference for a screw cap, and specifically MWC's preference for it versus cork. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, it's you know, we steered away from cork maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It's just because it's inconsistent. You know, you could you can have a dozen bottles of wine under cork, and you can open every single one of them, and every single one of them could be slightly different. And it's not, you may have a corked wine, so the wine might be affected by the cork, tainted. The wine may also be modified by the cork, so it's influenced by the cork. Some will age quicker than others. With a screw cap, we find it's just consistent time after time. There's less bottle-to-bottle variation, and as a winemaker, that comforts me when I'm sending things out, that what's in each bottle will be the same each time you try it.
Yeah, and obviously that's quite predominant in the Australian wine industry now. We bring in probably 45 wines, and I would say almost all of them are under screw cap, and they vary in price point from, you know, retailing $15 up to $70. The wine is still under screw cap, and it's a good quality wine. So the Australian wine industry, probably in the early 2000s, Tom, you might be able to correct me, started in the movement towards screw caps, and now it's predominant across pretty much all Australian wines.
Yeah, I think in the sort of 90s, guys in Clare Valley were starting to sort of experiment and pioneer it. And one thing I was excited to read last week was that there's some top young winemakers in Burgundy that are bringing wines to the US market under screw cap, right up to Grand Cru White Burgundy, which is cool. And even I read the other day, Domaine Laflave is going away from cork, traditional cork, for all of their white wines as well. So I think we're onto something down in Australia, and eventually it'll start filtering out. But one thing, you know, we dine out quite a bit in this industry, which is one of the, I guess, upsides of it. But I do often see, you know, waiters that I think that they wish they had a screw cap wine like at their disposal, because they're at the table, they're busy, they're trying to get it open. And it really, not only is it give that consistency you spoke of, Joe, but I think it's just sometimes it's more efficient as well.
Used to work in retail before I came to the PR side of things, and Henschke at the time was $699 in my store, and I looked it up online the other day. It's like pushing 900, I think, their current vintage.
Grace, yeah.
Yeah, they're the highest end wine at an Australian winery is under screw cap and is close to $1,000 these days.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it is really kind of across the entire continent that you see it.
Yeah.
So Randy says that spice and tea are some of his favorite Pinot notes, and that finding it in a Pinot under $20 is extremely rare, and I could not agree more.
Nice.
We're hearing a lot of excitement in general from everyone, which is echoing what you guys hear when you're shopping the wine, that it's just really you're tasting the value in these wines. And then Jeff Kralik would like to know how the partnership between MWC and Hudson got started.
Yeah, I might just touch on that, Henry, if you don't mind. We were we started the Hudson Winebrokers business about 2 years ago, importing you know, Australia's like top small regional producers, and most of the wines were retailing at about $25 or more, and you know it was a real, you know, wines we love, and it was but you know, you notice when you're bringing over wines from the other side of the world. And then there's this category at $15 to $20 that's really growing. We knew the whole time we needed to have something in that sort of zone. But at the same time, when you do a lot of tasting, you go back to Australia, and it's frustrating because you can find a wine that you like at that price point. Then you go and taste the other wines from that range, and they kind of let you down. And so we did a lot of tasting, and then there was I was a sommelier in Melbourne, and there was a guy I used to buy a lot of wine from in the restaurants in Melbourne, and he, I was chatting to him just saying, you know, it's hard to find wines that you can get at this price. And he goes, I've just started working with this new project, and it's really exciting, and it's really taking off in the restaurants in Melbourne and Sydney. And he said, you should really try it. So I think it was September last year, Henry and I were back, and we met with the guys at MWC, and every wine they pulled out was a knockout. And we kind of really looked for elegance and freshness and balance in our wines, and we didn't want to sacrifice that just because we were going to shift the price point. And I think as you taste all of these wines today or tonight, you'll see that they all have that thread of elegance and complexity that kind of really over deliver on their price. And but once we tasted the lineup, it was a bit of a no-brainer. We got the wheels in motion, and you know, these things take time, but since May they've been here in the US, and now I think when we showed them to our wholesalers on the East Coast, they were all, and you know, master sommeliers up in Seattle that we work with, they tasted them at the price point too. They just couldn't believe it. So the wines were able to get across the country fairly quickly, which I think is quite rare in this day and age, because you know, there's a lot of brands in the US market. It's quite competitive. So it was a testament to the wines and I think the brand and what it can do that everyone picked these wines up. almost immediately.
It's really exciting. I know that you guys, when we first started working with you, you guys were in 16 states, and it's already at least 20 that you have on deck for like the beginning of next year, right?
Yeah, I think it'll be 21 to 22 by January next year, and MWC is going to be a cornerstone of the offering in each of those markets, which is quite cool. So yeah, it's, you know, and the whole thing is it can kind of get people thinking Australia has this kind of you know, light touch to their wines. Even their full-bodied red wines have a sort of refreshing touch to them. And I think as time goes by, we'll look at the Australian category having this type of complexity where we maybe thought we had more power and fruit. Now we've got sort of earth complexity and sort of elegance coming through. And these will be the type of wines that kind of make people understand or even experience that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say I was already seeing that kind of influence trickle in a few years ago, and it's just really picked up.
Yeah.
And you guys are here at the right time with the right wines. Like,
and I think it goes back to what
drinking.
Joe was mentioning earlier. It's about, even within Victoria, the amount of diversity that's there, and with that diversity, you get lots of different styles and expressions. And for a long time, Australia didn't really play a diverse hand with the wines it was bringing in. And we were enjoying that diversity at home, whereas now through these wines and the broader portfolio, people can actually see lots of different, you know, I guess, styles of Shiraz, or, you know, expressions of Pinot, and you know, like these sort of, you know, Cabernet Sauvignons from around the country. So yeah, it's an exciting time for Australian wine. We're still going to get it in everyone's glasses and get them enjoying it, but it's certainly on the up.
Yeah. On that note, people have been asking lots of questions about food pairings. I wanted to say, first of all, that Frank Morgan, Drink What You Like, said regarding this Pinot that he's really digging it, and he's getting aromas of strawberry, cherry jumping out of the glass, and a hint of mint. So he says, well done, Joe Nash. And a lot of people are wondering, and I absolutely agree with that. I'm very impressed every time I taste. We want to know, specifically Monique Sultani wants to know, what traditional Australian dishes do you pair with the Pinot Noir?
Do you want me to go?
Traditional Australian. We would drink Pinot Noir with, I guess, a lot of game over here, and I guess duck. Maybe not traditional Australian dishes, but that's kind of the food matching we would look to go with. I think the Pinot being a light.
I might just interrupt quickly there. You know, it's not traditional Australian, but I think Melbourne has one of the best Chinatowns in the world, and you know, I think compared to you know, I don't really eat Chinese much over here, but in Australia we had so much awesome Chinese duck, because in Melbourne, especially not far from where Joe lives, was built on a gold rush, and so there's a great Chinese culture. So some of that, you wouldn't call it Australian, but we definitely eat a lot of those foods in Australia.
That's fascinating. I did not know that, and it's part of maybe not Australian or authentic Aussie culture, but authentic Melbourne culture, Victorian.
Yeah, absolutely.
Henry,
so, yeah.
Do you have any?
No, Asian. I mean, when you ask the question, traditional Australian food, it's hard to sort of put a tag on it, but we have a strong, as Tom mentioned, strong Asian influence in the food in Melbourne and the East Coast, and I think this Pinot goes really well with some of the Asian flavours as well.
Absolutely.
And I was just going to have to say, sorry, you have to excuse Joe and I. We're actually tasting and spitting because it's still 11 o'clock in the morning here. I hope you guys are actually enjoying the wines. You can. We have to wait. Our rule is after 12, isn't it, Joe? So another 45 minutes will be fine.
Well, this is the most concrete version of it's 5 o'clock somewhere, because it is 5 o'clock here. That's when we started here. So wherever you are tuning in, you can have this wine. But yeah, red wine in the morning is always a little rough. We're going to move on to our Cabernet, but while we do that, let's just speak to how many cases of each of these wines were made. I think that's a question from Amy. Over here for you.
I can go there.
Got you in here.
The question was about production. These wines, it's roughly about 2,000 cases made of these wines. at the moment, though we obviously worked with MWC because of the fruit they have, and also the winery has capacity to grow. So whereas we're working roughly about 2,000 cases each varietal, we would, as we take them across the US, they have room to grow that capacity to you know, whatever it needs to be to supply the market. You know, we're expecting, we'd hope to get around the 10,000 cases per SKU would be our goal with these wines, and these guys have the fruit and the capacity in the winery to make them.
Yeah. Without compromising quality.
Exactly.
Can you guys speak to, I'm going to hold up the label right now just so that everybody knows what we're tasting here. This is our 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon. And while we get started tasting that, can you speak to the inspiration for the MWC label?
Yeah, well, I think the label, when we actually, as Tom was talking before, when we met the guys from McPherson Wine Company, they had wine in a couple of different labels depending on sort of the markets they were working with. We saw this particular label and we thought it was, we liked it because it's relatively simple, but it still communicates, I think, that it's an exciting new wine. I think it aims for the millennial market that probably doesn't have a history of Australian wine. It's something that's eye-catching and it's easy to remember, and that got our attention, obviously. But the quality of the wine in the bottles is obviously what's kept our attention. But yeah, I think the idea is to be. I think it's wines which are going to express their varietal, but they're still going to have a little bit of bit of fun around them as well, and be approachable as well. So not taking ourselves too seriously, I think, is what this wine's about. These are wines which are going to be great value, but if you look at the label, there's a bit of fun there as well, not too serious.
Yeah, correct. And
I will say that there's sort of the sorry, Joe, go ahead.
It's okay. I was just going to say that MWC itself is actually McPherson Wine Company, so that's where the whole MWC came about in the first place.
I was just going to say that there's that kind of perception as you start to get into wine that a lot of companies use eye-catching labels like cute animals to sell grocery store wine. That's the Yellowtail story. That's so many stories. And now that I know a lot about wine, I don't buy wine for the label, but if a wine that I love is a good value and has a good label, it makes me love it all the more. Mm. So one thing that I thought the very first time that I saw and tasted these wines was, I would feel cool walking into a party carrying this and impressing people who had never tasted an Australian wine at all the way up to people who have had a lot and people who drink wines at higher price points often. I think they really look hip and they taste fresh, and that's not, as someone who, again, like yourselves, wants to open a bottle of wine for its quality, not its look. I do care about what's inside more than what's on the outside, but the packaging does enhance the experience.
One other thing on this label, I mean, a lot of wines that we see come from Australia, you'll see on the front label, wine of Australia, and we're starting, I guess, to talk about Victoria and where this winery is in central Victoria. And hopefully in 5 or 10 years, this actually carries a lot of meaning, that Victoria is a great resource for wine growing. There's a long history of wine growing, and there's a real kind of small production mentality that comes through Victoria as well. And so that's something that we obviously are familiar with in Australia, but the US isn't as familiar. So it was important for us to push the varietal, because we want people to be able to go to a Pinot or a Cabernet if that's what they're after, but then become familiar with Victoria as well, rather than Australia or Southeast Australia or something. So that, I think we're at the beginning of communicating that, but it was something that was important to us as well.
We have a couple of questions a question and a comment from Frank Morgan, Drink What You Like. He says this is an exciting time for varieties other than Shiraz in Australia, and that he's been loving the Pinots that he's tasted. And then he wanted to know, he said, this is from 16-year-old vines, the Cabernet in our glass. And he wanted to know if these are the oldest vines in this vineyard, or the age of the other varieties that you're growing and making into MWC.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a question. So the MWC Cabernet is from a vineyard called our Sinclair Vineyard, which is nestled by the Goulburn River. The Cabernet, there's 2 Cabernet blocks in the vineyard. They sit side by side. We call them the old Cabernet and the new Cabernet. They're only 3 years apart. They're not actually that different. However, the old Cabernet is planted on sand, and the sand used to grow proteas. And now we grow this wonderful Cabernet, which, even though the old Cabernet and the new Cabernet blocks are side by side, this block of Cabernet is far superior. And so the new Cabernet block doesn't make MWC grade at all. It's just not as good. But just the intensity and the colour that we get out of the Cabernet every year from this block of Cabernet is fantastic. And it would be the oldest Cabernet block in that vineyard, for sure.
Joe, do you see, have you seen quality of the fruit kind of increase as they've gotten older? Do you think there's like a spot at 10 years or something, or is it they yield pretty well?
No, we don't.
3 or 4 years on.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, we're conscious of not overcropping these vines, and we're conscious of now we've found this sweet spot of Cabernet, really looking after those vines and really making sure that we can get this Cabernet fruit year after year. So we I don't think the vines are anywhere near past it. I think the fruit will only get better and better, because as we're learning more about how to make the Cabernet, we can put more back into the vineyard. So it's really important it goes both ways.
Right.
I was just going to say something that I was thinking about, and it actually leads into a really good question that we just got, which is I have to keep reminding myself, I never forget that it's a time difference and that you guys are a day ahead. But I do forget that, like, Victoria being the southernmost state in the southern hemisphere actually means that you're closer to the South Pole, and that means that you are a cooler climate. I think of going south within the United States as going warmer.
Towards Mexico.
So that's something that I have to keep sort of flipping in my mind. And then, of course, it's like winter, spring for you guys right now.
Spring, late spring, yeah.
And it's heading, obviously, into fall, winter for us.
Yeah.
Which brings a question that we received, which is, what U.S. region, this might be a good question for you, what U.S. region would you compare the wines of Victoria to? Or would you?
Well, I would break Victoria down because, I mean, it's such a small area with so many regions. So, I mean, look, when I look at things like Mornington, I think more like Willamette or something like that. But then we're about an hour and a half north of here in central Victoria. So, gosh, it's a good question. It's a little, Joe might be better position to answer it, because you go from sort of Strathbogie into something like Goulburn and you get quite a shift in temperature in such a short space. So, Joe, do you see any parallels with any US regions in central Victoria?
No, I don't. Not one for one, I don't think. And I think that's what gives central Victoria its point of difference, is that it is such a diverse area within one region, if you like. The vineyards are all offering different nuances and different bits and different based on that elevation of the climate. And you come from Strathbogie to Goulburn, a huge shift. Strathbogie is much warmer than about 26 degrees, whereas we get, really down to valley floor. So it's very different.
So that Fahrenheit is 45 is over 100.
Yeah.
So you're getting over 100 Fahrenheit in the valley.
So that could be almost like Washington or Northern California. Yeah, but then Strathbogie might be getting into maybe like closer to, it's not coastal, but getting into like Sonoma Coast or something like that, where you've got higher elevations.
Right.
So there's not one region that we could associate it with.
Yeah.
No. So does that fail, that question?
No, not really.
That's good. I mean, it always, I know context is so good when you're trying to taste wines and you haven't stepped foot in the region, but it's a funny one, because even when I find myself in sort of Sonoma and Napa are so close to each other, but they behave so differently, and it's like because of mountain ranges and proximity to the coast, and there's a lot of similar like land influences and elevations that do the same thing in Australia, and essentially south facing and influence from the south rather than being influenced from the west, and yeah. So it's a tough one.
Wannabe Wino wants to know whether regional labeling is or isn't a big thing in Australia at this point.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I think we're starting to promote that. I mean, just I guess strategically for our portfolio, we predominantly work with only one winery from each region. So our philosophy was to say that where Australia probably had been pigeonholed as having wines from Barossa and McLaren, there's a huge variation in the different regions because of the climates and the soils and winemaking styles. So regionality is critical to how Australia needs to be perceived. So we work with probably about 13 different regions of Australia, from Tasmania to Hunter Valley, Central Victoria to Western Australia. So we're promoting that regionality, and I think you're starting to see that more in Australia now, where regionality is promoted on wine labels as well, where wines are from, particularly these wines which they're trying to express that region and the varietal that work well in that region.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you have any food pairings with this Cabernet? Or what would you recommend, Joe?
I would. The Cabernet is a lovely wine, and we would have something like roast beef or a big pasta or something with the Cabernet. That's typically where we would head with this style of wine over here. Lovely for a Sunday roast, actually, in my house.
Money. Joe, just maybe a quick little bit on the style of the Cabernet, because I think this, Australian Cabernet can be different depending on where it's from, but this is kind of quite indicative of it being quite sort of long. Some people over in the States might call it lean, but it's got a herbaceous quality and a quite a linear kind of feel to it, rather than being, kind of jammy or too sort of juicy. Is there a sort of style you like to see in Cabernet that you're showing in the wine?
I mean, again, for me, whenever I'm making balance in the wine, so we want to balance, and for me, the Cabernet has got good length here, right? It's still got good fruit. It's got good complexity, and we're trying to keep that kind of more elegant style. We're not trying to make a big jammy overripe Cabernet. We're looking again French oak, small format wood, so 300 litres, 55 barrels in it, and it does have that herbaceousness, but the herbaceousness again is integrated into the wine. It's not over the top. It's got the lovely black fruits to me. That's what I'm trying to do every year. Again, catch the variety.
Yeah, it's a nice kind of lift of the herbs. But I get a lot of sort of like red licorice kind of qualities coming off it too, which is I find appealing when I see in Cabernet, because I often see it in very high quality Cabernet when you get that kind of aniseed and licorice and red fruit and sort of coming into play.
Mm-hmm. On that note, we were hearing a lot from our bloggers about the kind of mint and spice characteristics. I don't know if I'm just programmed to think Australia and eucalyptus, but that's something that I picked up on a little bit, but in a softer way than these really bold other areas of Australia that have Cabernet. But that kind of brought to mind for people that mint and spice would be really nice with Christmas pairings. So do you have, for Thanksgiving or Christmas, I know you guys don't have Thanksgiving, but either of these kind of, in our neck of the world, fall, winter, holiday foods?
For the Cabernet,
yeah,
we would it's a red meat kind of wine, if you ask me. So I'd be looking at something that's quite strong. It's a strong wine. You want a strong food to go with it. So even something like a really nice strong cheese would work well with the Cabernet at the end of the meal, I think, because you need strength with the wine, strength in food and strength in the wine. Otherwise, you're going to overpower one or the other.
I think picking on those holiday flavors is, if you get rosemary coming through in any of your dishes, I think it really picks up on Australian Cabernet. Where you could be doing lamb, but you could even be doing something like turkey with good stuffing and rosemary. And with I would call this a medium-bodied Cabernet with that herbaceous quality, you can really pick up on those kind of nice dried herbs.
Yeah, I feel like sage would go nicely with this as well. Also with the Pinot, actually.
Yeah.
Kind of meanness. I use sage a lot in my Thanksgiving cooking. I wanted to point out, we're going to move on to the Shiraz in a moment, but I just wanted to point out, I don't know how well you guys can see from here, but this is our big Australian map, and Victoria is over here. Tasmania is beneath it. It's probably just kind of a blurry blob in the background, but that kind of shows you where we're talking about and just how big the entire country of Australia really is, which we know, but it's over there down low on the map. So I feel like looking at it by itself and realizing that this one little section here is the size of Oregon really puts it in perspective.
Some funny things we get asked is, when people say, what was the vintage like in Australia? And we go, it's a good question. Where do you want to be in? And
that's like, what was the weather like in the United States this year?
Yeah, it really is. And, we live in Los Angeles and we have blue skies every day. And then we see the, the blizzards and the storms that come in the Midwest and the East Coast. And it's like a little utopia out here. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, and it pays back to that diversity and the subtle differences. But even, just this Victoria, there's about 20 tiny regions within that tiny state. And they all characterized as regions, the equivalent of an AVA over here, because they have subtle differences, and that could be the coastline, it could be the soil type, it could be, the elevations.
We're going to get into a few more questions. I want to know, or I should say, Monique wants to know, Wino TV. Monique would like to ask if there are indigenous grapes that you're growing in Victoria.
No, there are. Everything in Australia would have been imported from, some point in time back into the country. We have the oldest grapevines in Australia nearby us, and we have 1860 vines. So they're very old, but they're not we're not using the fruit, but there are some very old vines in Australia for sure.
Yeah. Are they, Joe? Are they James Busby vines? Would they've come through from his findings?
Yes, they did. Yeah. Yes, they did.
Yeah.
It really is. That really is a young wine growing culture, because even like in California, we got serious about wine for a little bit in the 1860s when phylloxera hit France, but we had sacramental wine in the 1700s.
Wow.
So to hear 1860, it is old to still have those vines, but it sounds young.
Yeah, well, they're lucky because they haven't been hit by phylloxera, but yeah, Australia's a very young country. I think we're probably 100 or so years younger than even the US because we're so isolated. And yeah, there's lots of native flora and fauna out there, but grapevines weren't a thing.
Gum trees, kangaroos.
So we're going to move on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, I was going to, exactly what you're going to say, the Shiraz. I just wanted to make a comment as people are trying the Shiraz that we were pretty excited about this Shiraz because I think, Australia, unfortunately, the US had been pigeonholed a particular type of Shiraz. And, while that has its place, we felt that there was probably a little bit, people just associate Australia with tended to be bigger, jammy Shirazes from the Barossa or the McLaren Vale regions, which are the warmer climate regions of higher alcohols. So when we found this Shiraz and we tasted it, we were just like, wow, this is completely different to what you'd expect. And when we show it around the country, people are really excited about it. This particular Shiraz, which we're drinking at the moment, got 92 points in Wine and Spirit this year as one of their best buys in the value edition. So it was great to get that recognition there. And just talking to Jo about how she makes it, it's quite exciting.
Yeah, it is. The difference with the Shiraz and I guess the Pinot and the Cabernet and the Cabernet are single vineyard wines. The Shiraz is a multi-vineyard wine. So we're sourcing fruit from different vineyards within Central Victoria. We source some Strathbogie fruit in here, or we work with our growers on the Strathbogie fruit. We also bring in some fruit from Dookie, which is a region in the northern part of Central Victoria. It's quite hot up there. Then we head over to Heathcote, which is quite temperate, moderate, but still quite warm. And the soil over there is red and it's clay, and the fruit is wonderful and earthy. And what we do with the Shiraz blend is we bring in the parcels of fruit into the winery and we keep them all separate. So we ferment the wines, and once the wines are finished, then we bring all the parcels onto what we call the bench and we put the blend together. And when I'm blending the wine, I'm looking at a little acronym I use, which is called BLIC. And BLIC to me makes the wine complete. So I'm looking for balance in the wine. So is everything integrating nicely? Is anything sticking out? Is there too much oak? Is there too much spice? Then I'm looking for length on the wine. So once I've consumed the wine, can I still taste it? Does it still have good length? Then when I pop my nose in the glass, is it intense? Am I getting lots of lovely fruit and different things out of the wine, which I am? And then complexity. So every time I pop my nose into that glass or take another sip, can I see something different? And so with this blend, I really focus on Blick when I'm putting all those little components together and looking at how we get the bits and pieces. And the Mourvedre in the wine, the proportion of Mourvedre will vary each year depending on all the other components of the wine and how we put it together at the end of the day.
I want to ask a question from Frank. He wants to know from Joe, he said you've nailed it with the Pinot and Cabernet Sauvignon, and he wants to know what newer varieties are you most excited about working with?
Ooh. Well, it depends what I'm allowed to work with, but look, you know, we have to be a bit careful in Australia. We need to focus on what we can do well, and what we don't want to do is try and compete in markets with products that we can't actually do. We play a little bit around with some Tempranillo, some Sangiovese, bits and pieces here and there, but nothing too alternate for me at this point in time. Although, having said that, you never say never, so see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I know that, you know, Australia, I guess traditionally Shiraz, Cabernet, the Pinots, the Chardonnays, but overall in the Australian wine scene, one of the things we are seeing is a move towards some of the European grapes, so the Tempranillo, the Sangiovese, because some of the warmer regions that works quite well, and so people are starting to experiment with that. You see a lot of young winemakers come through making those sort of those Italian varietals, which is quite fun. So yeah, down the track it could be something we can look at if it's the right climate for them.
One thing we're seeing, and there's probably some near you, Joe, is the Fiano that's popping up.
Ooh, that excites me.
Fiano.
I've seen Fiano out of northern Victoria. I think it was brought in by the Chalmers family. But yeah, I mean, look, it's probably in micro quantities at the moment. But you know, I think there's certain regions obviously you guys in Central Victoria can really do well with these varieties. But there's certain regions that maybe are getting too hot that are starting to think, oh, you know, what's a long-term, you know, kind of sustainable solution rather than planting wines that need to be irrigated heavily or something. And I've seen Fiano being one of those ones that's popped up from time to time.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. I mean, you know, there are Vermentinos and there are Proseccos and there are Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigios, and there are certainly things out there. It's just, you know, being able to do them well at a level that we can sell them, you know, at this price point. So that's the trick and the key.
Yeah, it's all about true to varietal. I mean, with the MWC range, we've actually got four wines in across the US. Obviously today we're focusing on reds, which suit what we're the fall season there. But there is a Pinot Gris that we have as well. Obviously the Pinot Noir and the Cabernet are two of the biggest selling grapes in the US varietals. So we obviously wanted to get those into the game. And the Shiraz is something that Australia is known for. But also here we've got a slightly different expression of it with the Mourvedre and the blend as well, makes it quite interesting. But yeah, there's a show over here. We do have a Pinot Gris in the variety in the range as well as we start coming into the warmer months again. That's something that I'm sure will do quite well.
That brings to mind a question from Jeff, who wants to know, with only 5% Mourvedre in the blend, why, when it's hard to pronounce and such a small percentage, do you choose to list it on the label?
I think mostly for a point of difference, if nothing else. It shows you that the wine is not a straight Shiraz. It is a Shiraz blend. We don't have to put it on. We're not legally required to put it on, but for the point of difference, we are putting it on for sure.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you might have touched on it before, Joe. But what do you say that it offers? Is it I mean, I get a lot of, especially on this bottle today. I don't know what it is, but a lot of tar and sort of earthy, sort of meaty qualities. And you think that's something that's coming from the Mourvedre?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the earthiness and the meatiness are certainly things that come from the Mourvedre. And I think you say 5%, but if you take that 5% out, then you plug it with something else. So then you have a 10% swing. So it actually is, you know, quite an important part of the blend. And I think I've certainly looked at the wine without the Mourvedre. I've certainly looked at the wine with Tempranillo in it as well as just another point of difference. But the Mourvedre adds to the wine absolutely without doubt.
Meaty was the first word that came to mind when I put my nose in this glass, and I can't even remember if I was hungry before I smelled it or became hungry when I did. We have
Southern barbecue, I think. When you go and eat some smoked meat.
Well, it's dinner hour for us, So we have that
I think
option.
this is such a good barbecue wine. Like if you probably don't see it too much there, Joe, but the Texan style barbecue, like briskets and stuff that's slow cooked with all those spices, this wine just eats it up.
I actually think it would go well
Yeah.
with turkey for Thanksgiving. I think would be very nice with the Shiraz.
Mm.
Yeah.
It still has that nice pop of fruit to it. Without, whilst we say meaty qualities, it never loses that, beautiful soft fruit in the mid palate.
I'm feeling like definitely the dark meat, which is what I typically choose from the turkey.
Yeah.
Richer, kind of oilier meat would stand up to it well. We have questions, some of the same questions kind of in different wordings from a few different people. Are you conscious of alcohol levels when you, with regard to the market, like what the market wants in a wine? Do you tailor your wine or craft it to be higher or lower alcohol based on what the consumer seems to be wanting?
Good. That's a good question. I think alcohol's a very important part to wine, and the thing about the alcohol is it's all based on the ripeness of the fruit. So the sugar level of the fruit converts to the alcohol of the wine. Now what we don't want to do is pick the fruit when it's green, and we don't want green characters coming into the wine. We don't want underripe characters. So it's really important to have a balance when you're picking, to pick it at the right time. You want to be considerate of the acid, you want to be considerate of the flavors, and hence you want to be considerate of the sugar level going to result in the alcohol. It's an interesting one every year, and every year I think that brings us something different in terms of ripeness and alcohol. But what we don't want to do is make a wine that looks underripe. So that's the most important thing when I'm making the picking decision.
Yeah, I would say the alcohol content on some of these being in the 14 range isn't low, but it's not extremely high, but it's lower than other Australian wines that I've seen, certainly. But it tastes very balanced.
One thing we look for as well when we're sourcing wine is wines that really reflect their region. And there's no point, as Joe mentioned, going in and trying to make a Côte Rôtie in Central Victoria, or you see, like people obsessed with lower alcohol wines, but then you have a region like Barossa, which 14.5 is almost a sweet spot. So I think the winemaker's understanding of the region is a part of the terroir and how they can pick up on it. And it is all of our producers will pick on that, ripeness point, rather than being conscious of nailing an alcohol level, and that's being true to the sort of terroir you've been given to work with, I think.
Tom, you touched on this a little bit, but what impact, if Joe maybe wants to speak to this, would you say that climate change has had on grape growing in Victoria?
Yeah, well, it's certainly an interesting point. Certainly, I mean, one of the things about Central Victoria is, we are, well, Strathbogie's not so much, but we are irrigating some of our fruit. And I think moving forward, we'll be putting more irrigation if we have to keep things going. Certainly areas like Tasmania becoming a lot more popular in Australia because it's a lot cooler down there. And regions like the Strathbogies, I assume moving forward, they'll be planting more fruit up there just because of generally the cooler climate. So.
Have you seen one thing I heard, Joe, talking to some of our winemakers after the 2016 harvest, was that it was quite, and I don't know whether it's global warming or not, but it was quite like a lot of like the whites and the reds were brought in closer together than they had been in the past. It was quite an accelerated vintage, like a stress, like not stressful for the fruit, but stressful for the winemaker, I think.
Very stressful for the winemaker, and you're very correct. It was a very condensed harvest. We harvested in about 2/3 of the normal time that we would out of 2016.
Wow.
And, it was just, again, not stressful for the fruit, but stressful for the winemaker, stressful for the winery. We got through it and the wines are looking good. However, it'll be interesting to see what happens out of 2017 and if 2016 is setting a pattern for us moving forward. I don't know. We'll see.
And just to remind everyone, the harvest year is January, February, March 2016.
Yeah.
In Northern California, kind of 12 through 14 had that same pattern. Napa and Sonoma
it's all coming
and Mendocino. So and then suddenly last year was kind of irregular. And then this year throughout Sonoma County, and I believe also in Napa, people were delighted because they were seeing a break in that, what seemed like it might become a pattern, and things had kind of spread out. And it was just kind of glowing harvest year in
Yeah.
a lot of areas for a lot of varieties, that the low stress for the winemaker, where everything was coming in kind of like clockwork separately. So maybe it will be a pattern, and maybe it will be something that changes.
Just go and watch Leonardo DiCaprio's new documentary. Will probably explain it.
So we have a fun question that I'd love to go into. If you were to compare each of these wines to a song or musical style, I'll let any of you guys take this. There's 3 of you, so you could each take one. Speaking to you.
Song or a
Wow.
musical? Yeah, that's a fun question. I would say the Pinot, maybe the Pinot we could compare it to opera. It's a little bit lighter and, a little operatic, if you like. I'm going to handle the other two to the other two guys.
I'm going to say that the Shiraz is like the Stones, because it's like
Oh,
it's got a little bit of style, but it's got a little bit of grit to it as well.
I thought you were going to say like Southern Rock or something, since you went into the barbecue. So.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough Southern Rock, but I definitely know the Stones, and I could drink that bottle listening to some Rolling Stones best of.
I like
sure.
the Stones better than Southern Rock. So.
There you go, Henry.
Jeez, wow. I'm going to say I like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but I don't know.
I thought you were going to say Bruno Mars, mate, on that.
It's great with some Red Hot Chili Peppers, I think. The Pinot Gris. There you go.
I would love to turn that question out to the bloggers. I would love for you guys to tweet about what you are picking up on musically, or I love pairing wines with movies. I'm most proud of having paired mead with Winnie the Pooh, because he loves honey.
Oh, okay.
So if you guys have like movies, pop culture references that you think pair with these wines, let's hear them.
Okay, there you go. Twitterverse.
And everyone is asking when they're invited to visit, by the way. So.
Anytime.
Yeah, well,
I think.
that's a good question. We will be doing some promotions in the new year, where we will be looking at bringing some people out from the US to Victoria to get to see Melbourne, to get to meet Joe, to go through the winery, to get involved in some of the food scene that happens down here in Melbourne. So yeah, keep a close eye out. We'll be doing something early in the new year around that to get people involved, and yeah, a couple of lucky people are going to come out to Australia to meet Joe and see the region. So it's a good question.
And if you haven't been to Melbourne before, it's I think it's a city that's driven by food and wine. It's surrounded by wine regions, and it's got an amazing dining scene. I think the San Pellegrino's top 50 restaurants is going to be hosted there in 2017, and it's sort of a little bit of a secret gem down like in the sort of southern corner of the world. But
and if you had any doubts about which part of Australia Tom comes from, it's from Melbourne down.
it's a shocking city.
Well, our hour has flown by. I wanted to say thank you guys, everyone at home, for tuning into our broadcast and tasting these wines with us. We hope you enjoyed them
Absolutely.
as much as it sounds like you did, and as much as we do. And thank you, Henry. Thank you, Joe, all the way in Australia in the morning, having to.
It is Friday,
your red
though.
wine.
We've still got to get through our last day of the week. They're about to go to the pub.
That's true.
definitely from
Call it an
Melbourne.
early day.
It's Friday.
I'll let you guys say
It's
goodbye.
Friday.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Guys, Henry.